Hello everybody, happy International Archives Week and welcome to this ASA webinar focusing on digital preservation. I would like to firstly acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where I'm currently working from, the land of the Wurundjeri, and pay respect to elders past and present. And would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. I am Jaye Weatherburn. I'm here today to talk about digital preservation. How ready are you? And I'm joined by Michaela Hart, Digital Archivist from the Department of Human and Health Services, and James Doig, Assistant Director, Digital Archives Taskforce from the National Archives of Australia.
Oh, I'm unmuted, so I can say a quick hello to everybody. Hello, everybody. Lovely to be here.
Hi.
So I am up first. So I am going to attempt to be technologically savvy and share my screen. So I'm going to assume that's working and that you can see a fabulous starting slide for me. Unless I hear otherwise, I'm going to carry right on. So as I said, I'm Jaye Weatherburn, here to talk about how ready are you for digital preservation. This year I have two work roles, as you can see. I am a program manager for digital preservation at the University of Melbourne, and I also work for the Digital Preservation Coalition, working to improve access to the DPC's program of activities for members across the Southern Hemisphere. I have to say a big thank you to Julia Mant for putting together this really inspiring and broad theme today. It is so inspiring, in fact, that I actually struggled to find what might be the most useful for me to share. What I've decided to focus on is some frameworks for guiding planning work around digital preservation. I'd like to talk about collaboration and building communities, and I'd also like to share a couple of resources I find really useful. So without wanting to insult anyone's intelligence here today, something I always like to do is find common terminology, a clear definition for what it is we're talking about when we talk about digital preservation. And I offer this definition to you all, that digital preservation is the act of maintaining digital materials in an understandable form over the long term. So long term, we're talking about a period of time long enough to raise concern about threats to digital materials, such as obsolescence or physical damage to the hardware and the media that digital materials are stored on. Long enough to need to take action due to the effect of changing technologies. For example, being able to render and access digital formats over time. Here is one framework showing what digital preservation therefore requires. This is the three-legged stool framework, which sets out what's involved in digital preservation. So we have a need for organizational infrastructure, policies, procedures, practices, and people. Technological infrastructure, of course, so equipment, hardware, software, a secure environment for managing digital assets, and of course, the all-important resources, the startup, the ongoing, and the contingency funding to enable and sustain digital preservation. Lots of digital preservation work starts as projects. My work at the University of Melbourne is no exception to this. I was initially brought in on a one-year contract to work on a digital preservation project. Frameworks like this can seem a little bit overwhelming, and I'm speaking for myself when I say that. I'm speaking for my past self from March 2016, just over 4 years ago now when I started at the University of Melbourne, with the task of implementing digital preservation on a university-wide scale. If there is one thing I want to pass on to everyone today, it's that I've experienced firsthand how well planning, patience, perseverance, and small iterative steps can go a very long way, even if it takes a very long time. I have one example of what I consider good planning that takes into account these organizational, these technological, and resourcing elements. It's one of many steps that we took at the University of Melbourne, having a robust strategy and roadmaps. So 2 years before I was brought on as a project resource, we're talking back in 2014, a team of really dedicated library, archives, records, and research infrastructure folks at the university developed these and successfully campaigned for senior leadership endorsement. So in the university context, this is academic board endorsement of the digital preservation strategy, a 10-year vision, and a set of implementation roadmaps. So these strategy and roadmaps took into account the organization, the technology, the resourcing requirements of digital preservation. The roadmaps were what then enabled me 2 years later to take and to use as tangible steps to get started on. And this is one of the very first steps that I began with. The goal was to review and consolidate existing university support for research data and records management and digital preservation. So to meet this goal, I conducted 40 face-to-face interviews with professional staff, faculty research managers, and research centre personnel, produced a report with key findings and recommendations for our next small iterative steps. Doing that work took me 3 months from April to June 2016. This work gave us a real foundation to finding out where the university was in terms of what people knew, their existing skills. It also gave us a snapshot of where technology investment and choices were at, so we could start seeing how digital preservation technology infrastructure might fit in, what we might choose to go with. Perhaps most importantly, by talking to a really wide range of people, I was able to start building a sense among us of the shared responsibility that goes into long-term stewardship of digital assets. One of the questions I actually asked in the interviews was, what does digital preservation mean to you? And I did this as a way of moving all of us towards that common definition and a shared understanding of what it was we are trying to achieve. If we take a look at this digital practice and collaboration work, this was presented by Nancy McGovern at the International Digital Curation Conference in 2019. It gives us a really good starting point for thinking about the broad range of stakeholders who should be engaged and contributing to digital preservation discussions. These examples in the circle here, they might not necessarily be relevant to all contexts you find yourselves in, but I think the illustration and the questions that it brings up are what is most helpful here. Particularly these two questions that can help guide your own collaborative practice in your context. So who would you bring? Who do you need at your table to progress your digital preservation goals? And who is not at the table and why aren't they there? So it seems a no-brainer that, archives, libraries, digital preservation records management, museums, traditional knowledge keepers should be at the table, but there is a lot of expertise and knowledge to be found in IT fields. Data science and software development are being examples of these. They bring data curation and domain expertise, problem solving, project management, knowledge of technology. And on that note, I thought I would sneak this in. Talking to IT. While we don't have time today to talk in depth on this topic, I do offer a couple of really useful links. Firstly, Scott Prater's How to Talk to IT About Digital Preservation paper is a really helpful guide on this topic. And the second link is for a more specific case study that myself and two of my University of Melbourne colleagues presented last year at the IPRES International Digital Preservation Conference. I speak to so many colleagues, both in our region and internationally, where there seems to be barriers in communication between those who steward digital materials over the long term and technology workers. So in this paper, we've tried to share how we broke down some of those barriers in our context to get everyone at the table and on the same page. I will quickly move on now to talk about the value of being involved in communities. Going back to the university's digital preservation strategy, to meet some of the culture improvement goals in that strategy, in February 2018, we organised and ran a half-day event to see if there was interest in developing an Australasian-based community of practice for a really broad range of sectors and organisations dealing with digital content. Turns out there was a heap of interest, and thus the Australasia Preserves community of practice has now been well established. We have an active online forum with just over 350 members. We try to run monthly online meetups on a really wide range of topics, and we have a fabulous volunteer co-organisers group. This community is amazing. It allows us to connect and share our work, our knowledge, our expertise. Anybody is welcome to join, and you can find details on the website. Also, in terms of building community, this year the DPC and the University of Melbourne have a partnership to open the first DPC office in the Southern Hemisphere. So my role with the DPC is dedicated to enabling improved access to the DPC's program for members in the Australasian and Asia Pacific regions. The DPC, for anyone who's not familiar, is an international membership organisation for digital preservation. It helps members around the world deliver resilient long-term access to digital materials. The DPC, they've got over 100 organisational members from all around the world. Currently, there's 7 Australasian-based members of DPC, and we are currently really busy developing a work plan for the region over the next 6 months and onward to start enhancing DPC support for members in our time zone. And we are very keen to continue growing the membership to support sustaining this office and this endeavour for hopefully many, many years to come. Finally, as promised, a couple of resources I just love. Firstly, the DPC's Digital Preservation Handbook is extremely accessible. It covers a really wide range of digital preservation areas, as well as delving into specifics around preserving digital materials. I highly recommend taking a look at this, or if you're already familiar with it, revisiting it whenever you need some direction on a particular area you might want to focus on. The DPC Rapid Assessment Model, the DPC RAM, this is a maturity modelling tool. It's been designed to enable rapid benchmarking of where organisations are at with their digital preservation capability. It can be used by organisations of any size, in any sector. It's applicable for all content of long-term value. And it's really accessible, even better. You can go to the website and give this a try. By doing the RAM, by doing a self-assessment using the RAM of your current capability, you can use the results to then develop a strategy or develop a program of work, or even put together a simple plan with steps to guide how you improve or want to move forward with implementing good digital preservation practice. Finally, the NDSA levels of digital preservation. It's a useful tool to use. It has a series of levels from level 1 to level 4 across a range of areas. So storage, integrity, control, metadata, and content. But keep in mind, these levels are really focused on the technical aspects of digital preservation. They don't take into account the elements around policy, procedure, sustainability, those organizational and resourcing aspects. If we think back to the 3-legged stool model that I showed at the beginning, the organizational and the resourcing aspects are just as important to make sure we consider, as well as the technical ones. Why I share this matrix with you is because it can be one of those first small steps you take to assessing what level you're at with your technical processes for looking after digital content and seeing where you want to get to, and then planning and taking those small iterative steps to get there. So in closing, I would like to encourage everybody here to think about your next small iterative steps you're going to take, either to get started with digital preservation in your context, or the next step you want to take to improve your current practice. It can be as simple as, you could read about an aspect of digital preservation you want to learn more about, or you might join the Australasia Preserves community of practice and start contributing to the discussions there. Or you might have a more specific goal in mind, like using the DPC rapid assessment model or the NDSA levels to benchmark where your organization is at with your technical processes for digital preservation. Thank you everyone for listening. I will now hand over to Michaela.
Thank you, Jaye. That was fantastic, and I am I'm just about to click show my screen, and I'm a bit nervous because I've got 3 screens and I don't know which one you're going to see. So let's have a go at which one can you see? Can you tell me? Jaye?
It's got lots of icons on the desktop.
Has it?
Mm.
All right. Well, I'm going to take that one off. And move this one over. How about that one?
Much better.
Does that look like a PowerPoint?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, great. Hello, everybody. Thank you again, Jaye. That was fantastic. My name's Michaela Hart. I am a digital archivist at the Department of Health and Human Services in Melbourne, and we have we've got some international attendees today, I think. So welcome, a warm welcome to you. My role here today, I think, is to, as a practitioner archivist working in digital preservation space, I wanted to give you a look behind the scenes at some of the things that are the challenges for me and the daily opportunities that I have to work within digital preservation. My role is very much still in a hybrid state. So my role as digital archivist is still a percentage of the work that I do, and increasingly it is about actually making sure that the digital preservation is integrated into the business as usual of dealing with. We've got over 200 years worth of paper archives that we're still processing. So increasingly that's looking at things like making sure that there's strategies in place to deal with obsolete media that is contained within paper files and things like that. I won't go too much into that today though. So one of the biggest challenges that I'm really starting to get my head around is to think about what not to keep. And as I find, I'm a fierce advocate, as Jaye is, for collaboration within my department. And one of the things that I'm finding is that having to re-interrogate with people the fact that in this cloud-based environment, there's an assumption that because we can keep everything, we should. And that means that I'm spending a lot of time having conversations about the need for archival skills, for appraisal, for advocacy, and the fact that there are a lot of records that are created within my department that are time-based. That's a slightly different use of that term that many of you might have heard, but it's there are legislative obligations, statutory obligations for us for only keeping things for a particular period of time, and if we don't actually engage in them in an appropriate way, we're in risk of breaching our obligations. So there will always be, and I'm not just saying this because I want to make sure that archivist skills are continued to be relevant, but it's really something that we need to think about, that we still do need to be appraising, particularly born digital collections. So the next thing, so this is just an example of one of the magnetic tapes that we digitized. So one of the National Film and Sound Archive here in Australia released a paper called the 2025 Vision. And the premise of that is that they have, they've said that 2025 is pretty much the date. If you haven't got your ducks in a row in terms of converting your magnetic media onto a stable format by 2025, the opportunity will likely be lost. So we have a lot of records in our collections that were on magnetic media, and we used the same legislative requirements that I've mentioned before. So where we have a requirement in government to make sure that those records that we have are secured, but also that they're accessible, and to make those tapes accessible for the things that we have there's a requirement to keep them for longer than 2025. We were obliged to make sure that they were converted into that stable format. So we used that date as a motivator for getting all of those magnetic tapes appraised and digitized. So that's happened now, and I'm really grateful that they're done. But also now there's an additional labour now of making sure that the preservation of those digital records are stable and accessible. So, you know, just swapping out one format for another, but at least we know that they're preserved and available and accessible. So, I put this slide in just as a sort of a look behind the scenes of what a day looks like for me. This is a recent transfer of records from one of our closed agencies, and the box that you can see on the top has got laptops and iPads and mobile phones, and you can see what's on the bottom of the trolley, and none of those we have passwords for or anything like that. So that's a challenge for me as an archivist that was traditionally used to working with paper records. Now we are required to be able to extract the records from that, and once again, that's closely working with IT. They've got the technical expertise and I have the archival expertise, and there was nothing we were ever going to be able to do without each other. And we're in the process of setting up our own forensic lab so that we can actually do our own in-house digital preservation end to end, but also that we can provide training and support to students. I regularly have master's students from archiving courses, but also colleagues in smaller departments and agencies that don't have the same resources as us. So finally, I'm just going to talk a little bit about social media archiving, and I will use the example of Twitter. So I've been really lucky, and I'm assuming that I'm talking to the converted when you all know that social media, if used as part of your business or your authorised role, is a record. I'm assuming a lot of you know what that man over in that other country has been getting up to on Twitter. But I'm really lucky that my department and the Department of Health and Human Services at the moment in these times has become a really trusted source of information. And that has made my job a lot easier because it's meant that the motivation and the understanding of the importance of these records is bigger, better than ever before. And in terms of being able to capture the social media, so this is an example of, this is yesterday's, because these statistics come out from my department of the daily coronavirus stats, come out every day at about midday, and they hadn't quite come out when I put this final slide in. So this is yesterday's, and we know from the statistics that these this is where everybody knows to go now at lunchtime to get the daily stats. And so these are being captured, but also we're capturing the community engagement with those tweets. And from my point of view, that means that, you know, we're the public service, and this is another way that the community are keeping us to account at these times. So the responses from the public are really meaningful. So I'm just going to show you one more. And in terms of advocacy, this was last week. The VicGov Twitter account, for the first time, used digitized photographs from one of my projects in their social media, and used it to sort of demonstrate the historic context of public health. And this one tweet is a result of years of advocacy and working closely with our social media teams and comms teams. So it was really exciting. So just quickly, there's a couple of different things that you can do. I've got some slides at the end that have got some great resources for how to do some social media archiving, but there's just really two approaches. One, you can use a third-party provider who will do it all for you, who will harvest your social media in a preservable format, and you don't have to worry about it. The other way is, of course, just doing it manually yourself. At the moment, I'm doing a bit of a hybrid approach because I want to stay close to what our social media looks like, so that I can respond to it, and also want to find out what the daily COVID stats are. I think I just have one last slide. That's my dad. This is him with the computer that he built in 1972, I think, which was also the year that I was born. So Dad's there because the final things I'd like to share is that there's no such thing as being ready with digital preservation. It's just starting, and I think it's really important, as Jaye said, to build the community. The digital preservation community have been so welcoming to me, and having the support and resources available means that I know, even though I often feel alone within my business unit, I don't feel alone ever in terms of any digital preservation challenges that I've had. So I'm very grateful for that community. And so there's just some final resources there. I had a feeling that Jaye and James between them would be providing you with all of the really good key digital preservation ones. So I've just added some additional resources that speak to some of the things that I've been talking about today. So the social media records and the audiovisual archiving and the National Film and Sound Archives deadline 2025. If you haven't seen that, that's a must read. And so that's me now. I'll hand over to James. Thank you, everybody.
Terrific. Thanks, Michaela. That was a great talk. I can understand where you're coming from with those transfers that you're talking about. My name's James Doig. I've been at the National Archives for almost 20 years now. And for large swathes of that time, I've worked in digital preservation, digital transfers, digital ingests, even from some of the earliest times back in the 2000s when we were developing software and so on. But I've had large breaks in between those times, working on other projects like, the project team for the design and construction of this building I'm in now, the Peter Jurek building in Canberra, and also the relocation of records into this building. But I'd just like to start off by taking a cue from Michaela's first slide, which I thought was a pretty cool slide. It had a picture of some magnetic tape there, and it said what not to keep. Now, back in the day, it must be 15 years ago now, going back to 2005 at the National Archives, we did a big audit of obsolete and digital media that we had in custody. And we've got things like this. I think there are about, 137 9-track magnetic tapes that we found. This is quite a good one. It's from 1983, and it's from one of the series of the Royal Commission into the effects of Agent Orange on Vietnam veterans. And you can see there's a label on there, and it says Thailand Remote Sensing Centre, Landsat 4, a bit more technical information on there. Another things I've got here, 8-inch floppy disks. That's from 1982. They're data files from the Independent Committee of Inquiry into Commonwealth Government Laboratory Services and Facilities. There's a bunch of them there. And somewhere here I've got some interesting ones, 5¼ inch floppies. They're from 1984, the Royal Commission into British nuclear tests in Australia. You probably can't see the label there, but it says on it, do not delete under any circumstances. Anyway, so we did this audit, and of course these were the days before things like Cryoflux and Bit Curator and things like that. So we actually went out to a data recovery centre and to recover, the bit streams from the legacy media. And it turned out to be quite a successful project. And so we had about 300 pieces of media, and we were able to recover data off about 245 pieces of that media. So there's about an 82% success rate of those media that were going back to the 1970s. So you might say that's successful. I mean, the other side of the story is that 18%, about 45 pieces of media we couldn't recover any data from. So that stuff is now lost forever. But the nice story is, and which gives us some lessons about digital preservation, is that we got the bit files off, and that was the end of the project. We then stored that material in our digital archive as sort of raw bit streams. Some of it was ASCII based, so you could sort of open it up in a text editor or LibreOffice or something, and you could actually see the text, although of course all the formatting was gone. But things like this Landsat stuff that was in proprietary formats, the data recovery vendor didn't know what it was. There was really nothing we could do with it. But then a couple of months ago, we sort of thought, well, let's have another look at this stuff. So we passed the bit files from this Landsat tape through a fairly common geospatial image analysis software called ENVI. And lo and behold, it rendered a nice satellite image, or images, I think there are about half a dozen of them, of Vietnam, which I suppose is what you might expect from Landsat written on it. But we did manage to recover that actual data, and we were able to export those images off as high resolution TIFF images. And it sort of made sense in a way, because also in the box with that, there were sort of positive and negative images like that I'm showing of those satellite images. So there's a nice tie-in there with other analog records in this series. Of course, now, it's just sort of the tip of the iceberg. We really need some descriptive work to work out relationships between these images, the photographs, how all this stuff, was submitted into this Royal Commission, into the effects of Agent Orange. There's quite a lot of interesting archival work still to do. On that, and I guess from a digital preservation point of view, the lesson really is, if you've got the bits, if you've recovered the bits from this degradable media, if you store them, according to digital preservation principles, so sort of multiple independent storage, if you're doing, the integrity checks like we're supposed to do to ensure that none of those bits are corrupted, then 15 years later, you're going to recover, the content of that material. So it sort of gets to the heart of what digital preservation is about. Now, hopefully I've got about 5 minutes or so left, because what I really wanted to do is talk a bit about what we've been doing in the last few years at the National Archives. So just quickly to go back to 2017, we had a couple of workshops with staff drawn from across the organisation to look at our digital capability, to actually look at where the big gaps were and what we needed to do to become, as our vision statement says, a leading archive in the digital age. So we'd had a digital preservation capability for quite some time, and we kicked this off around about 2000, 2001. But really, by 2017, we'd been treading water for quite a while, and we knew there were some quite big gaps there. So after those workshops, we began a review of policies, approaches, systems, the sort of things Jay was talking about earlier, standards around digital preservation and collection management. And really 5 big areas of work came out of that review, which I'll just briefly talk about. And also it's worth saying that in order to focus the organisation on this work, the Director General, David Fricker, set up what was called the Digital Archives Taskforce, which drew in expertise from across the organisation and externally as required, so that people came in and out of the team. There was always that core group of people that established sort of continuity across different pieces of work. So the first body of work was around policy review and development. And in early 2018, we released a new digital preservation policy. And this provided a bit of a blueprint. It's up on our corporate website if you want to have a look at it. So it provided a blueprint for what was to come. And it marked a significant revision of our earlier principles and approaches that developed, back in 2002, 2003. And as we've gone along with these different projects, we've also developed other policy-like documents. For example, sort of papers and positions on compression, on storage requirements for digital collections, on data formats, and so on. The second large piece of work, which ended up probably being the biggest one, was an approach to market for replacement systems. Now, this started off as a procurement for replacement digital preservation system, because that was getting a bit long in the tooth. But it actually expanded to include the whole shebang, so archival management and discovery and access. So there was a big body of work to develop business requirements with the functional areas. And then there was the procurement process itself, sort of at the end of last year, early this year. And it's worth saying there that, talking about communities, we did get an awful lot of help from other institutions who, interestingly enough, had gone through similar processes not long before. So, State Archives New South Wales, Prov, Queensland, and the National Library. So anyway, the result of that was a big set of business requirements and a very large single pass tender, but it was successful, and now we're in the process of piloting the successful systems. The third big body of work we did was a review of the series system, interestingly enough, which, well, as you might expect, it confirmed the continued relevance and primacy of the series system for archival control. And out of that review and out of that work came an archival control model for the series system, which we didn't have before, and a conceptual data model. And again, the archival control model, the ACM as we call it, is available on our website, corporate website, if you want to have a look at it. Now, we went down that path because we were wondering, is the series system, is it built to cope with complexities of digital records and so on? But, the problems we've had with controlling records, including digital records, isn't the series system, but it's our implementation of it, our archival control system, which is record search. And in particular, like a lot of collecting institutions, I've always had this problem about how best to control record parts, components of items at that sort of granular level. And record search tends, the way it works, it sort of shoehorns us into constructions like parent item, sub-item, aggregate series, aggregate item, constituent item, copy items, and so on. And we felt that, we wanted a simpler way of dealing with these many combinations of item-item relationships that actually better reflected Peter Scott's vision with the series system, through a system that was actually based on relationships. I'm probably running quickly out of time. So the fourth big body of work we did was developing staff digital capability. So we conducted an audit or survey of staff skills based on some work that had been done by Digital Preservation Oxford and Cambridge University Libraries. And then after that, we brought on Adrian Cunningham to develop a training needs assessment based on the results of that survey. And based on Adrian's work, we then started developing sort of face-to-face training with PowerPoints, participants manuals, all sorts of things like that. We also developed a software workshop that gave staff the ability to use the common types of digital preservation software, you know, and build up their sort of confidence with using software and, you know, digital preservation software that way. And we also developed 4 e-learning modules around this. And I suppose if the one good thing about the COVID lockdown is actually forced staff to complete those 4 online modules. So we've had sort of over 500 completions, you know, of those 4 modules in the past few months. I should also say about capability, Jaye mentioned IDCC and Nancy McGovern. Straight after IDCC 2017, Nancy McGovern and Kari Webb, we invited them up here, and they ran their, you know, 5-day digital preservation management workshop, which was great. And we've been using and reusing, you know, all of that content for our purposes. And it's probably also worth noting in the context of DPC that Australia Preserves, and in particular Jaye, they've developed a sort of digital preservation essentials modules that we've had a look at, I think prior, Jaye will be able to mention this, prior to its release. That's a really great set of free products that presumably Australia Preserves will make publicly available. And then finally, the 5th big thing we did was in transitioning to sort of a more mature business as usual digital preservation footing. We've also tried to become more active in this space. This is something we used to do, but not so much in the last sort of 10 years, I suppose. You know, where we'd always go out to conferences and talk and so on. So we joined the Digital Preservation Coalition, which, as Jaye said, set up an office in Australia. And we've involved ourselves in some sort of innovative projects that have been going on overseas, such as the UK National Archives Archangel project, Yale University's emulation as a service infrastructure project. So getting involved, you know, getting involved in communities in that way. And so hopefully I haven't gone too far over time, but that's it from me. I should conclude just by saying that this is all a work in progress, and that there's still, you know, a lot of work for us to do going forwards. Anyway, thank you very much.
Welcome back, everybody. We've got a first question from Melissa Campbell, who's asking, how would you approach IT when they've told you that the archive drive of images has been lost due to a virus and they may not be able to recover much from the tapes? She suggests that everybody should be able to come up with some ideas for this question.
I'd ask them to try again. Yeah, I think that would be a really good opportunity to demonstrate your value. If you could go away, even if you weren't able to come up with an answer straight away, to go away and do some research and maybe to reach out to the DP community and come up with some suggestions. IT will often give you a first no. They may not even be aware of some of the things that they can do. They work within a pretty limited framework. So I'd go away and do some research and ask them to have another go. Jaye or James?
I'd be asking, why aren't they practicing basic digital preservation principles on collection material? But
True too.
disasters like that are fascinating, and you know, sometimes at conferences like IDCC and other things, they have special unconferences where in a secure environment we're all able to talk openly about disasters we've had. And look, we've had a few at the National Archives, and I'm sure everyone has a few that they can relate.
We're waiting for more questions to come through. Do the panel have questions for each other?
Jaye, I'd like to hear, and you may not know the answer to this yet, but I'm really excited about having the DPC here in Australia, and I know that the Australia Pacific has got a lot of different unique challenges relating to digital preservation, particularly as some of our Pacific partners. I wonder if you could talk to us about some of those.
Yeah, that is a very good question, Michaela. We've only had the office in Australasia since January this year. So the partnership between the Uni of Melbourne and the DPC, it's been set up for 2 years to develop a work plan to start delivering events and support for members in the region. So we're at the very beginning of that, developing the work plan element. It's already been acknowledged by our 7 Australasian members, the various challenges and issues, and actually also the strengths that our region has to bring to the international community. And we've already been starting to talk about how do we amplify our voices in the international discussions? How do we get our needs to the top of the list? So we're very much in that development phase at the moment. Yeah.
Does anyone have a question for James?
I do if nobody else does. James, I was loving your just your experience with recovering content from old media. I'd love to know, you know, from your experience doing this and going through this, how do you now advocate to people so we never have to do that again? So we don't have to keep doing that with our current formats. How do you advocate for good digital preservation practice?
Yes, well, I suppose that's an advocacy thing, isn't it? You know, I work for a big government agency, and or a government archive, I should say, and our clients are Australian government agencies. And we've always had great difficulty in getting agencies to comply with our standards and requirements and the rest of it. And we do advocate to them about this sort of thing, and we will continue to do that. But I do expect that out there in agency land, there are probably big warehouses of data sitting on obsolete or decommissioned media. We really need to go out there and find out. Just another prop that I didn't talk about was this that landed on my desk not long ago, just a month or 2 ago, from our Sydney office. And this is an 8mm data cartridge. It's got Chevron geophysics written on it, East Pilbara. I assume that's some sort of air, you know, geospatial thing. And so although we went out all those years ago, identified legacy media and thought that we don't have to worry about this anymore, I think, you know, we are still got to have to worry about it and think of ways to deal with it, regardless of how much we advocate and get, you know, people to see the light.
Thanks, James. We've had a question asking each of you how many staff or resources are allocated at your respective institutions for digital preservation. Do you think that's enough for continuing operations?
Good question. This is one I always think. I've heard, correct me if I'm wrong, if there's anyone from National Library New Zealand, I know you guys have a lot of staff, and I'm thinking around 10 for digital preservation. And I'm always jealous of numbers like that, because speaking for the University of Melbourne, my role is the only dedicated full-time resource to digital preservation. And over the last 4 years, I've kind of slowly been trying to get a whole bunch of my immediate team to have certain aspects of their roles part of digital preservation. So it's that single point of failure thing. You never want one person with all of the digital preservation skills. And that's it. They could leave, or so more is good. But even we are at the beginning of trying to develop that capability and more stuff.
Michaela, a couple of people have asked you for if you could speak more about how you capture social media manually.
It's quite simple. It's capture of it as a PDF, and then saving that into our record keeping system, which we use as Trim. So I have a metadata schema that's developed that captures all of the contextual metadata around it. So within our department, each social media post gets captured by our social media team as part of their record keeping systems. That was one of the good things about developing that relationship with them, was that I got really quick access to finding out what their record keeping was like, and then I was just able to focus on what we weren't doing already, which was capturing the public response. One of the good things about being able to use our own record keeping system is that then I'm able to link what I do with what the social media team do, so that the records are contained within a loop.
We've got a couple of questions. One from someone who works with a lot of local history museums running projects to digitize museums. Would you argue that preserving oral history collections on magnetic tapes is of higher importance? And if it is, how do we encourage this?
Is that for me? I can answer anyway, or if the others have got something to say. Particularly in terms of magnetic media, the writings on the wall in terms of what the National Film and Sound Archive have been able to provide as guidance, which is 2025. So from my point of view, it's a priority at the moment to, and it makes good business sense to focus on the most vulnerable collections for preservation. And if that's the magnetic tapes, then that's where the priority should go. I don't know if James or Jay have anything additional to say about that.
Well, yeah, for small institutions or running off the smell of an oily rag, and there are quite a few of these, there are some basic things you can do, even if it just means copying the bits onto a server and backing it up. That's sort of a minimum digital preservation approach, but you really don't want to be keeping stuff on degradable media.
No.
A couple of people have asked if you're having this storage in-house using your own technology, or if using cloud storage providers, or if you're using third-party providers who have the specialized technology outside your organization. I guess that's probably a question for you, James.
We're on premise. So a big project we had last year was replacement enterprise grade storage. So we bought in an on-premise S3 object store for all of our storage needs going forward. So yes, we're currently on premise. But there are archives and libraries out there who have no problems at all. Even out of country cloud storage, especially for sort of access repositories.
Well, our newsletters now include video and are sent out on MailChimp. Do you know of any software that can capture the newsletters with all this dynamism? Currently, I'm catching them as a PDF and a separate MP4. I think that's a tricky question.
I don't. Yeah, it's a tricky question. I mean, if none of us can answer it, I'm happy for that person to get in touch with me, and I can help them find an answer.
Sure, yeah, I'll pass on the details afterwards.
I'm actually reminded of the email archiving symposium held in Wellington earlier this year. I think there was something around e-newsletters. And I know they've just made those videos available on YouTube, so we can
Yes.
follow up with a link if I'm remembering that correctly afterwards.
Jaye, how do you see the Aust preserves being different to the DPC?
Oh, the trickiest of questions. That is very good, and one we wrestle with. As part of the partnership, I mean, Australasia Preserves has been recognised by DPC as something that needs to continue to be supported and uplifted, right? It's a community of practice. It's a volunteer community that has come together around a common set of issues, whereas the DPC is an international membership organisation that delivers targeted support for members. So they're obviously very different entities. And I feel quite passionately, and so does the DPC, about supporting an open community of practice. So the two will continue on as long as we have interested people, especially in that Australasia Preserve sense. And the DPC is a different entity seeking to further enhance digital preservation capability in the region. Hopefully that's answered the question as well as I can.
Thanks, everyone. And one final question as we wrap up. What's the one takeaway you want people attending the webinar to leave with? I think you can all give an answer for this.
Well, I think it's for me, it's keep the bits and make sure they're properly stored and their integrity checked.
I would say, which is what I finished up with as well, which is that, you know, there is no being ready. It's just you have to start. Just take little steps. Reach out. That's more than one. Sorry.
Connect to community and take those first steps, as Michaela says. Just get started and reach out to people to help.
Excellent. Thank you, Michaela and Jaye and James, for a great presentation.
Thanks, everybody.
I'll send through the remainder of the questions to you afterwards. And ta-ta.
Ta-ta. Bye. Thanks, everyone.